Everyone's using AI now. And you're so behind the times. How funny. Every time your AI breaks down, you come looking for me. I don't negotiate with my subordinates.
The first sign something was off came from the quiet. Not the polite morning quiet a meeting room usually holds, but the uneasy kind, the kind where people sit a little too straight, breathe a little too shallow, and pretend they aren't waiting for someone to get blindsided. Lance Duval leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and sliced through my presentation with a smirk sharp enough to cut glass. "Caleb," he said loudly, making sure the entire conference room could hear, "you're from the clipboard generation. The whole industry uses AI now, and you still rely on yes. Experience." A few people chuckled, the polite, hesitant kind of laughter people use when they're terrified of looking like they disagree with management. I didn't say a word. I just adjusted my glasses, glanced at the slide I never got to finish, and kept my face perfectly still. Shock hurts less when you freeze it behind a wall. Let me ask you this. How would you feel hearing that in front of a full room? And where are you listening from? While we're being honest, about 95% of you are listening, but haven't subscribed yet. Hit that button. It's free, I promise. The story only gets better from here. Back to the story. Across the table, CEO Miles Renford nodded with the kind of enthusiasm only a man who didn't understand a single supply chain metric could muster. He loved buzzwords AI, automation, predictive futures, yet couldn't read a reorder report without his assistant whispering the numbers. I should have expected this. After 20 years in retail analytics, I'd learned that no insult stings quite like the one wrapped in corporate courtesy. But the real punch came a second later. As Lance clicked to the next slide, skipping my analysis entirely, I caught a glimpse of the forecast I'd spent 4 nights perfecting. Page 27, the only page in the entire deck that predicted the pending collapse of SKU 47, a hidden inventory sinkhole, projected loss nearly $3 million. Of course they skipped it. Who needs data when ego is running the meeting? I let the insult soak into the room, let the silence cling to me like the stale air from the overhead vents. I looked around the table, noting every nod, every forced smile, every pair of eyes too scared to meet mine. My experience, I finally said quietly, is the only reason SKU 47 still has a pulse. No one responded, but a few faces shifted, shock, confusion, a hint of fear. And in that moment, beneath the sting of humiliation, I felt something else rising, something cold, sharp, and patient, the kind of feeling that waits for the perfect moment to strike back. I should have known the conversation was already decided the moment Victoria Hale called me Caleb in that overly gentle HR tone, soft enough to sound polite, sharp enough to make your stomach tighten. Her office blinds were half shut, letting thin stripes of daylight stretch across her desk like warning tape. She didn't bother with small talk. HR never does when they think they're carrying wisdom carved into stone. "Have a seat," she said. Though her voice carried no room for negotiation, I sat. She didn't. Victoria slid a folder toward me, her expression perfectly neutral, the way someone looks when they've practiced the same speech on 10 other employees before breakfast. "Given the company's direction," she began, "we need to prioritize developing younger, more adaptable talent. Younger, adaptable. 2 words corporate America loves when it secretly means cheaper and easier to control." She folded her hands. "You're 50 now, Caleb. You've contributed a lot." But here she paused, searching for the most sterile word possible. "Working style is better suited for traditional environments. We operate differently." A polite way of saying, "You don't fit the aesthetic." I kept my face still, though a tightness pulled at the back of my jaw. "Traditional," I repeated. "Because I take notes that aren't written in buzzwords?" Victoria ignored the comment. "To be transparent, we don't negotiate responsibilities with employees in your tier. We expect them to follow leadership direction without friction. Your tier. Leadership direction. Friction. Amazing how HR can fit a whole insult inside a sentence without raising their voice." I didn't argue. What was the point? People rarely listen when they've already decided what box to put you in, instead. I closed the folder gently, slid it back toward her, and rose from the chair. "Thank you for the clarity," I said, keeping my tone smooth, almost friendly, because nothing unsettles a gatekeeper more than refusing to act wounded. Behind me, I heard her spoon tap the side of her coffee mug. It sounded oddly triumphant as I walked out. The hallway lights seemed brighter than usual. Buzzing faintly like fluorescent applause, I pressed the elevator button, willing myself to breathe. Humor is a strange shield. It doesn't stop the hit, but it keeps the bruise from blooming too quickly. The elevator doors closed, and my phone buzzed twice, then again, and again. Alerts, system errors, forecast failures. By the time I reached the lobby, the notifications had stacked so fast the screen froze. I didn't need to open a single one to know what happened. HR had revoked my system access clean. Instant. Thoughtless. Except Weslock's forecasting engine wasn't designed for thoughtless decisions. It ran on layers of manual logic I'd built over years, patching gaps no one else even noticed, without my permissions. The whole system panicked. Red warnings, missing data, cascading errors. I stepped outside, exhaling slowly into the cool air. They don't negotiate with dinosaurs, I muttered, but apparently dinosaurs wrote the instruction manual. By the time I reached my apartment that evening, the sky outside had already settled into that dull gray Seattle wears like an old sweater. Nothing dramatic, nothing stormy, just a steady, tired color that matched the weight sitting behind my ribs. I hung my coat on the wall hook, hearing the familiar scrape of metal against plaster. The sound echoed longer than it should have in a space that suddenly felt too large for one person. The apartment was still, almost politely so, as if it knew I needed a quiet place to fall apart without witnesses. Only the soft ticking of the wall clock broke the silence, each second landing heavier than the last. I stood in the middle of the living room, my hands still half curled from the tension I'd been carrying all day, and felt the air press against me slow, cold, unforgiving. 20 years, 2 decades of early mornings, late nights, and workloads no one else wanted. And somehow, all of it had been reduced to one sentence spoken with a casual shrug. You're outdated. I repeated it in my head, not because I wanted to, but because it clung to me like oil, thick, hard to wash off. I lowered myself onto the edge of the couch, elbows on my knees, eyes fixed on nothing. How does a person measure their worth when the place they spent years holding together decides that value expired for the first time in a long while? I felt something close to grief, not just for the job, but for the version of myself that believed loyalty would count for something. Eventually, I reached for my laptop, not to work, not to fix anything, just to distract myself with noise. The familiar chime of it waking up felt strangely comforting, like an old friend clearing their throat before speaking. I opened a blank browser tab, but before I could type anything, a small notification banner slid across the top corner of the screen. Your profile has been viewed by a senior talent director, Horizon Executive Search. I blinked, unsure if exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Then another notification followed, and another. Different companies, different recruiters, different industries. For a moment, I didn't react. The contrast between the silence in my apartment and the sudden hum of possibility felt unreal, almost disorienting. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing, unexpectedly, that someone had built a bridge beneath your feet while you weren't looking. I leaned back against the couch, letting the glow of the laptop wash over the room. The hurt was still there, deep, undeniable, but something else had cracked through the surface. Not hope exactly, but a shift, a reminder. Being dismissed didn't erase my worth. It only changed where it would be recognized next. The next morning arrived quietly, the kind of gray Seattle morning where the sky feels like an undecided thought. I sat at my small kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of coffee, still replaying the previous day in my head. The sting had softened overnight, settling into something duller, something almost analytical. Pain has a funny way of turning into clarity if you let it simmer long enough. As I opened my laptop, I wasn't expecting anything except distraction news articles, job boards, maybe another pity notification from a networking site. Instead, an email notification appeared almost instantly, as if it had been waiting for me the moment I logged in. Harbor Point Distribution Group, request for conversation. I read the subject line twice, then a third time, just to make sure fatigue wasn't twisting the words. Harbor Point was no small operation. They were organized, disciplined, respected everything Weslock pretended to be on PowerPoint slides, but never achieved in practice. The message was short, polite, and direct. They remembered the incident I'd fixed for them months ago and wanted to speak about potential alignment. A small, controlled pulse of hope nudged the back of my ribs, not enough to make me smile, but enough to make me breathe a little deeper. But before I could finish reading, another email appeared. Same sender. Different tone. We were informed by Westlock leadership that you may not fit into a modern, adaptable work environment. Before we proceed, we'd like to hear directly from you. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. So that was Victoria's latest community service project, spreading cautionary tales about anyone over 40 who dared to think independently. HR never misses an opportunity to protect the culture, especially when it means guarding their own image, I murmured. Victoria must have had a busy morning, letting the sarcasm settle softly in the empty kitchen. But there was something more intriguing than her predictable sabotage. At the bottom of Harbor Point's message was an attachment, a log file, stripped down and heavily time-stamped. The note beneath it read, "This came to us through a shared vendor channel. We believe it may involve improper handling by Westlock. Can you help us understand it?" I clicked the file open. Lines of data scrolled across the screen, each entry more suspicious than the last. Mismatched timestamps, backdated entries, overrides that didn't follow protocol. A pattern I recognized instantly, not because it was familiar, but because it was sloppy in a way only panic can produce. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was concealment. The hope that had been quietly forming inside me sharpened into something clearer, colder, not ambition, not revenge, something more precise direction. For the first time in a long while, someone wasn't just asking me to fix a problem, they were trusting me to tell the truth about it. The door hadn't opened wide, but it had cracked just enough for light to slip through. The moment I downloaded the log file from Harbor Point, I felt my focus snap into place with a strange, surgical clarity. Hope was one thing, but discovery, real discovery, had a different weight entirely. It was colder, cleaner. It stripped sentiment out of the way and left only the mechanics of truth. I opened the file, cracked my knuckles once, and began reading line by line. The rot showed itself almost immediately. The first timestamps didn't match their sequence. That alone could have been human error, except the pattern repeated at perfectly spaced intervals, like someone had altered them in batches. A sloppy cover-up is almost charming. A systematic one, however, is unmistakably deliberate. I scrolled further. Then came the inventory adjustments, perfectly rounded numbers, suspiciously neat categories, no variance spikes, no shrink, no discrepancies like a warehouse that had somehow achieved divine optimization. I'd spent 2 decades around inventory systems. Perfect data doesn't exist when it appears. It's almost always fabricated, and this was polished, artificial, pretty in the way lies often are. The deeper I went, the colder my thoughts became. A few minutes later, I found something worse, an active admin credential belonging to someone I knew had left Westlock nearly 9 months ago. Their access hadn't just been left open, it had been used, repeatedly, at odd hours, during cycles that required manual overrides. That was no accident, and it certainly wasn't incompetence. Someone inside Westlock knew exactly which strings to pull to make the system dance the way they wanted. I leaned back in my chair, letting the glow of the screen settle across my face. I wasn't angry. Anger requires energy. And right now, everything inside me felt sharpened and efficient. What I felt was understanding cold, mechanical understanding, the kind that tells you the house you'd been living in was already on fire long before anyone smelled smoke. I documented everything, time discrepancies, altered records, unauthorized logins, every small fracture that betrayed the system's facade. It wasn't emotional work, it was dissection, just as I was preparing to close the file. My email pinged, a single, nameless sender, no subject line, no signature. Normally, I'd ignore something like that, but something about the timing, the precision of it made me click. Inside was one sentence, "You're the only one they fear. Keep this." Below it was an attachment. I hesitated only long enough to acknowledge what that meant. Someone inside Westlock was watching. Someone knew what I was digging into, and someone wanted me to see what the company was trying to hide. When I opened the attachment, a raw, unedited version of a log file filled the screen, one from 12 months earlier. It was untouched, time-stamped correctly, full of discrepancies that the newer versions had scrubbed out. There it was, the original wound before someone dressed it up, for the first time since this began. The quiet inside me didn't feel like defeat. It felt like alignment, like every piece was finally snapping into place. The truth wasn't just rotting underneath Weslock's systems, it had been rotting there for a long time. And now, I was holding the proof in my hands. Submitting my resignation felt strangely anticlimactic. No trembling hands, no dramatic pauses, just a few clicks on the Weslock internal portal and a bland confirmation message that looked like it had been designed by someone allergic to human emotion. After everything I had uncovered in the last 48 hours, leaving felt less like a decision and more like a natural step in a sequence someone else accidentally started. 10 minutes later. My inbox chimed. Separation packet human resources. I opened the email, already predicting the tone cold, templated, and proudly impersonal. Victoria's digital signature sat at the bottom, stiff and perfect, like she practiced it in a mirror. Attached was a single PDF file. I clicked it. The document failed to load. I tried again, still corrupted, blank, unreadable. Of course it was. A dry laugh escaped me quiet, humorless but deeply appropriate, naturally. I muttered, Weslock couldn't even fire people properly. Their systems had the structural integrity of wet cardboard, and their HR documents apparently shared the same traits. The irony didn't sting this time. It just felt expected, like watching the ending of a movie whose plot you predicted an hour earlier. I closed the email and turned to packing up my desk. The process had a strangely ceremonial feel to it, sorting through years of old notes, half-dead pens, sticky pads with scribbled reminders, and a small collection of backup drives I'd forgotten I owned. My cubicle, once cluttered with the daily noise of problem-solving, now looked like an exhibit from a museum dedicated to undervalued employees. As I pulled open the bottom drawer, something metallic slid forward and tapped the edge soft, intentional, unmistakable. A small USB drive, silver, unmarked. My first instinct was caution. Weslock wasn't the kind of place where surprises meant good things, but as I picked it up, I noticed something unusual. A yellow sticky note wrapped around it with handwriting I recognized from years ago. You'll need this. Don't let them bury it. I stared at the note for a long moment. The handwriting belonged to someone quiet, someone thoughtful, someone who had always seemed one step away from saying something important, and one step too afraid to say it. This was no random act. Someone inside Weslock wanted the truth out, not rumors, not suspicions, the truth. I plugged the USB into my laptop instantly. A folder opened neatly organized, meticulously labeled, full of raw, untouched data from the warehouse operations, the real inventory, the real discrepancies, the real version of everything Weslock had been trying so desperately to paint over. A slow, deep satisfaction settled in my chest, not fiery or triumphant, but cool and precise. Revenge didn't need noise. It didn't need shouting. Sometimes it just needed one quiet act from the right person at the right moment. I packed the USB carefully into my bag, turned off my monitor, and took one last look at the space that had held 8 years of my life. No anger, no regret, just clarity. Leaving quietly was easy. What came next would not be. Walking into Harbor Point's headquarters felt like stepping into a cleaner, sharper ecosystem and environment built for people who actually understood the systems beneath their hands. No inflated slogans, no hollow meetings, no executives bluffing their way through technical briefings. It was competence in motion, and for the first time in years, I felt aligned with the pace around me. The receptionist handed me a slim envelope with my name printed in crisp type. I expected a visitor pass, maybe paperwork. Instead, a polished metal card slid into my palm, cool, weighted, precise, lead supply chain integrity auditor. The title hit me with a quiet force, not a surge of adrenaline, but something steadier recognition, validation. After everything with Weslock, seeing that title felt almost surreal. I clipped the badge onto my blazer, and the breath I took settled deeper than I expected. At the executive floor hallway, Harbor Point's CTO, Raymond Cho, approached with his usual calm precision. No theatrics, no corporate overcompensation, just a man who knew exactly why I was here. Caleb, he greeted, shaking my hand with firm intent. Welcome aboard. Thank you, I said, and for once. The words felt earned. As we walked, he continued. We brought you in for a reason. You understand Weslock's infrastructure better than anyone left inside that building, and they're about to need you in ways they won't enjoy. No malice, just fact. We stepped into the operations conference room where department heads were already gathered when the CTO introduced me. The room didn't shift with skepticism. Their expressions carried expectation, respect, and something else, readiness. The atmosphere was the kind that precedes strategy and silent acceleration. When the meeting wrapped, Cho slid a folder across the table toward me. "One more thing," he said. "We're extending your access." Inside was documentation for a credential I'd never seen: auditor-level clearance granting deep data review across vendor networks, partner logs, inventory streams, and warehouse interfaces. "Unlimited access to all Westlock-related data," he said. "Up to 12 months back, no restrictions, no approval workflows." For a moment, I said nothing. 12 months was enough to trace everything they tried to bury: the manipulated entries, falsified timestamps, altered supply trails, and every strategic omission they assumed no one would ever revisit. It wasn't just access, it was authority. And more than that, it was trust. I closed the folder and met his eyes. "I won't waste it." "We know," he replied, walking out of the room. The new badge caught the hallway light sharp, metallic, almost symbolic. A sense of transition rolled through me, steady and undeniable. I wasn't the overlooked analyst anymore. I wasn't the invisible workhorse they dismissed. I was walking back onto the battlefield, this time with clarity, leverage, and the weight of truth behind me. And for the first time, the war felt winnable. Walking back into Westlock for the audit felt nothing like returning to a former workplace. It felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone suddenly forgot their lines. The elevator chimed on the 16th floor. And the moment the doors opened, a strange, electric stillness met me, like the air itself held its breath. I took one step into the main corridor, and the entire office froze, not gradually, instantly. Keyboards stopped. Conversations clipped mid-sentence. A paper someone was handing across a cubicle drifted to the floor without either person noticing. I'd spent 8 years walking through these aisles, invisible, unnoticed, unremarkable. Today, I was a spotlight no one had asked for, and everyone feared. Lance was the first to react, or rather, fail to react. His face drained so fast he looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 seconds. He stood beside a junior analyst, mid-explanation, frozen with his finger still pointing at a chart on her screen. She glanced between us, confused, then slowly lowered her headphones as if witnessing a natural disaster rolling toward her. Then came the sound, a sharp clatter from behind me. I turned just in time to see Victoria Hale scrambling to pick up her coffee mug from the carpet. Dark liquid pooled around her shoes. The horror on her face wasn't from the mess HR had seen worse. It was from the badge clipped to my coat: Harbor Point, lead supply chain integrity auditor. She straightened, wiping her palms on her skirt, trying to assemble her expression into something professional. It didn't work. She looked like a hostess, forced to welcome a guest she had personally blacklisted. "Caleb, we weren't expecting," she began. "I know," I replied calmly. "That's why I'm here." Every word felt tight, contained. The tension sat in my chest like a storm held inside a glass. I continued through the office, heading toward the conference room reserved for the audit team. Eyes followed me with the same expression: fear mixed with something bordering on respect. The kind people feel when they finally realize the quiet one they dismissed had been holding the entire foundation together. As I approached the doorway, someone stepped out from behind a cubicle divider, an older engineer, Daniel Briggs, someone who had spent nearly as long as I had at Westlock, though always operating in the shadows of louder, less competent managers. He didn't greet me. He didn't smile. He just leaned in slightly and whispered under the hum of the fluorescent lights. "They hid a second data vault behind the legacy system. You'll want to see it." Before I could respond, he slipped a small access card into my hand, quick, discreet, practiced. "Use this," he murmured. "It bypasses their filters." Then he walked away, blending back into the office as if nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment, the card warm in my palm, the tension around me humming like a wire pulled too tight. Returning to Westlock wasn't just an audit, it was the beginning of the unraveling. The conference room felt colder than usual, though maybe that was just the anticipation tightening the air. Everyone from senior management to legal sat around the table, pretending to look calm while their eyes flicked nervously between each other. I connected my laptop to the projector in silence, letting the soft hum of the system heighten the tension the moment the screen flickered on. Half the room leaned forward, the other half leaned back as if distance might protect them from what I was about to reveal. "Let's begin," I said. I opened the first file, the screen filled with raw, unedited log data, the real backbone of Westlock's inventory tracking. No polishing, no filters, just numbers, timestamps, and discrepancies laid bare. Murmurs rippled across the table. A few managers exchanged glances, recognizing entries they claimed had never existed. Then I clicked to the next slide. A bright, disorganized Excel sheet filled the projector, its title sitting at the top in mocking bold letters, "Real Final Use This V9." A couple of jaws actually dropped, someone from legal whispered, "You've got to be kidding," under their breath. Every unauthorized edit, every overwritten value, every attempt to fabricate clean inventory numbers glared down at the room like a confession scrawled in neon ink. And then came the part that made Lance shift in his seat. I zoomed in on the edit history. Name after name scrolled past, but one appeared more than any other. Edited by Lance Duval. I watched his face collapse in real time. He tried to speak, but only a dry clicking sound came out. I didn't acknowledge him. Instead, I switched to the third file. Timestamps. Or rather, timestamps that had been erased, rewritten, or moved to disguise warehouse discrepancies. A timeline of manipulation so sloppy it bordered on insulting. I highlighted several sequences. "These should be impossible," I said calmly, "unless someone manually interfered." Silence. Utter, suffocating silence. Finally, I pulled up the last slide. A report that had been proudly sent to the board 6 months ago, stamped, approved, and celebrated. It looked pristine, polished, confident. I tapped the keyboard, revealing the comparison overlay. Red marks appeared everywhere. The numbers didn't match the real data beneath them. Columns lit up like warning sirens, because that's exactly what they were. A fabricated report exposed in front of every person responsible for safeguarding the company's integrity. The room didn't breathe. And then my phone buzzed. A message from Harbor Point's CFO flashed across the screen. I read it once, twice, then looked up at the room full of pale faces. "Harbor Point has frozen all contracts with Westlock," I announced, "effective immediately." Gasps punched through the silence. Lance dropped his pen. Victoria went completely still. Legal scrambled for their laptops as if they could undo what was already done. For the first time in years, I felt something fierce settle in my chest, a mixture of justice and precision finally landing in the exact place it belonged. The truth had detonated, and Westlock was standing in the blast radius. Chaos hit Westlock faster than I expected. The morning after the audit findings reached Harbor Point, the building felt like a sinking ship, emails flying, whispers slicing through hallways, managers disappearing into conference rooms with faces drained of color. I didn't need access to their internal channels to know what was happening. Fear has a rhythm, and Westlock was beating with it. CEO Miles Renford was dragged into an emergency board meeting before 9 o'clock, escorted by 2 directors who looked like they were escorting him to a sentencing. He didn't even bother to hide the trembling paper in his hand as he passed me in the hallway. A week earlier, he couldn't remember my title. Now he couldn't meet my eyes. Lance didn't stick around long enough to pretend. His LinkedIn profile vanished by noon, erased, as if that could erase the audit trail with his name all over it. Cowardice is quiet, but obvious? Then came Victoria. An email from HR landed in my Harbor Point inbox with the subject line "Consulting Partnership Opportunity." I almost laughed. The message inside was even better, full of polite desperation, strategic flattery, and a temporary advisory request that read like a plea for rescue disguised as professionalism. I answered in less than 10 words. "Rate is 7 times my former salary. Payment up front." They agreed within minutes, and that told me everything I needed to know about how deep the panic ran. The final meeting took place in Westlock's largest conference room, the same room where I'd once been lectured about my traditional working style. Today, silence drowned the table, every executive avoiding the other's eyes. I placed the termination documents on the table and looked directly at Victoria. "Years ago, you told me I wasn't worth negotiating with. I let the pause sit long enough to sting. Today, I'm signing the termination of the company that believed you." Her face collapsed, no defenses left, no polished HR tone to hide behind. The signatures were collected quickly, almost eagerly, as if the company itself wanted the ordeal over. I gathered my things, thanked the Harbor Point team, and walked toward the exit. And that's when I saw it, outside the glass doors. 2 workers stood on ladders, loosening the bolts on the massive Westlock sign. The letters came down one by one, metal groaning as if exhaling its last breath. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it falls in pieces, looking back. I realized something simple worth isn't decided by the people who fail to see it. It's decided by the ones who recognize it instantly. If this part of the story resonates, tell me, where are you listening from today? And if you want more stories of quiet justice and powerful comebacks, go ahead and like, share, comment, and subscribe. You might be surprised how far one click can carry a story.